thank you again for doing this. I've obviously, texted you and told you all the, the things of looking up to what you do in this industry. And so it's always a thrill to talk to someone that covers and does this for a living and your second time on. So much, much appreciated as we get ready now for the Pistons. And that will start on Saturday. Does it feel to you like this is a 51-31 team with how they're being discussed right now? And I know that 0-10 against the top three teams in the league, but obviously there's some concern, and I guess rightfully so, but it doesn't to me feel like they won 51 games as much as I wanted to.
I think there's a lot of angst about this series, and there's not a lot of expectations for the Knicks beyond this series. I think because of the 0-10 record you mentioned. I think most Knicks fans, most people who have paid attention are kind of resigned that this is a second-round team. But now all of a sudden, after I think the last time they played the Pistons, and we can all look at the rosters and say who was healthy and who wasn't, but all of a sudden you look up and say, wow, Detroit won the season series, and Cade Cunningham's been a beast against the Knicks. All of a sudden there's a lot of angst. And the New York media and the New York atmosphere as well as anyone. What is it today? It's Wednesday. There's rumblings on Tuesday about how Tom Thibodeau has to win this series. So by the time we get to the ball going up on Saturday, there's going to be a lot of nervous people going into the Garden.
Absolutely. My hope is the atmosphere. So something I've pointed to a lot is, and the reason I actually preferred to play Detroit till Milwaukee is Giannis's experience versus Cade Cunningham's first go-round. And a couple years ago when the Cavs first walked in the building, I know that the Pistons have a couple vets here with, Tim Hardaway and Tobias, but, you really got to show out, how the Garden could be a different animal in the postseason. So I guess we're leaning on that veteran experience from the Knicks and been there, done that, versus the team that hasn't had that experience yet.
That's going to be a role, play a factor. It should if you're the Knicks. I think the Knicks are the better team. I think they are a 51-win team. Certainly to your point, they didn't show it down the stretch, so there's every right to be concerned. Is Mikal Bridges worth everything they gave up for him? How's he going to play in the playoffs now after a couple of years with the Nets when he wasn't in important games? So, but I just think eventually the Knicks are the better team and they're going to win. But whether it's feeding off the Garden or just being more talented, I believe in OG Anunoby when the bright lights come on against Cunningham. So, I'd be shocked if they lose this series, but I get why everyone now with this so much time to build up is worried.
Yeah, and you mentioned before with Thibs, I think also, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, the climate in the NBA right now with head coaches. And you've watched guys that have won Coach of the Year. There was that stat, I think Thibs is the only guy left of the last 5 years. Guys that are winning championships a couple of years ago, now fired in Mike Malone. So I think more so than ever, maybe because of what's going around and what the current coaching market is, there's some additional pressure going into this postseason.
I think the Knicks situation is different. Now, again, we all know that James Dolan's a wild card, but I think Leon Rose and Thibs are on the same page. I think most importantly for Thibs, he and Jalen Brunson are on the same page. Obviously, Thibs and Rick Brunson are on the same page. So I don't see whatever factions happen in Memphis and maybe Denver happening in New York. That being said, you losing 5 to the Pistons, all bets are off. I mean, you'd be wrong. And Thibs is kind of the coach that's going to wear out his welcome, so to speak, the way he grinds players, the way he grinds players. But I don't see that yet with the Knicks. I know there was the thing about where Bridges went to him and said, hey, play the bench more, but I don't think that was that big a deal. I think the players and Thibs are on the same page. But you get knocked off in the first round after you went out and got Karl Anthony Towns and Mikal Bridges. That changes everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of that frustration also with, Bridges wanting to maybe, hey, listen, if you play me 42 minutes a game, I don't know if I'm going to be able to play every night type of deal. But listen, bumps and ups and downs in the season are going to happen. People try to make something of the heart thing with Thibs and all that other stuff. I think there's a mutual respect there, but the results will be the results at the end of the day. And they're going to have to, at the very least, get into the second round competitively to feel somewhat good, I guess, going into the offseason. As a competitive fan and knowing that, listen, Boston has our number and we didn't play well against those top teams, but you don't go into a postseason ever thinking, all right, at least in my estimation, we have absolutely no chance. I mean, I think maybe you get some guys playing well and you could kind of reverse that fortune against those top teams. But I guess you got to handle who's in front of you first.
It overlooked this Pistons team, even though I feel confident they'll beat them. But, I think there's one way to look at it, as we thought they would be after they made those two trades. And the other two teams, the Cavs and the Celtics, are a lot better than we thought. The opening night when the Celtics just blew the doors off the Knicks, we're like, oh, okay, that's just a fluke. Well, it hasn't been a fluke. And the Cavs, I think, are just a better team. For the longest time, I didn't believe it. I thought the Knicks would get them in the playoffs. But you watch them play, they're more athletic. Their length gives the Knicks a ton of problems. So, I'd love to agree with you and say you can't say you have no chance. Maybe a puncher's chance against the Celtics in the second round, but I don't know how you go from winless to winning 4 out of 7.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little different than going 1-3 against Detroit than being 0-4. And I think also it's the fashion that they went 0-4 in these games that's making people feel that way about those games. But, to me, again, deal with the first round and this team, like you talked about, Detroit, that I don't want to say they're playing with house money or there's nothing, the pressure is on the New York Knicks in this series. And, especially Detroit coming in here, only think that they have to get, just get the one game and go forward with that. So the pressure is certainly on New York, and we'll see how they respond to it. I'm excited, going to be in the building on Saturday night. To me, there's nothing like playoff basketball in New York City. So, hopefully, and people talk about this playoff switch. I don't know if there's going to be some sort of switch, but hopefully that adrenaline and the energy that the playoffs can create will bring out the best in this ball club. Because, again, they did win 51 games. I know that they didn't beat those top teams, so it's not like we're going in as the 7 or 8 seed and just pulling at straws here. But I'm hoping that we could, something could happen that we haven't seen. And maybe I'm just, irrational with that thought. I don't know.
I think it's irrational. I've been around as a Knicks fan long enough to know that energy and adrenaline you're talking about works two ways. Back in the day when the Knicks would go 10 minutes without a field goal, there'd be a lot of groans in the building. I don't think it was as big a deal as Stan Van Gundy alluded to, but that building gets anxious pretty quickly. Look, to be redundant here, I just think they're the better team. To your point, they won 51 games. They were. You look at the stats. I mean, was it like 3 or 4 teams basically in the NBA are better than them? 2 of them just have to be ahead of them in that league in their conference. So, I think they're just going to win. I think they're going to win the series. I'd love to say it's a toss-up against the Celtics, but as much as I sit here and say the Knicks are talented, we all know there's another banner in Boston Garden for another reason. Yeah. When you have a healthy Porzingis torching the Knicks like he did the last time they played, who are you going to stop? Yeah. Here, so look, I would love to say let's take Boston 6. Let's have a 7th game, roll the dice. I hope that happens. I hope we can have a chance. I hope the Knicks can have a chance to say we. But I just think eventually, you mentioned the adrenaline and the Garden. At the same point, the cream rises to the top. This is why Jalen Brunson is Jalen Brunson, right? You want to be considered an MVP candidate. You want to be considered one of the top 5, top 7 players in the NBA. This is where you show it. I don't think, I know a lot of people say Cade Cunningham's in that group. Maybe he is. Maybe we'll find out. You got to prove it in the playoffs, which Brunson has done with the Knicks.
For sure. And that's why I think we expect him to be the big money player, to play his best basketball matters most. But his partner in crime will have to be there and play good basketball. And we know that is in Karl Anthony Towns. So now, first postseason in New York, what do you expect to see from him? And I know he has these narratives surrounding him. To me, he's had a very solid season. I mean, some obviously on the defensive end, less to be desired there. But do you think he's going to have a good postseason? And what do you think he needs to show in order for the Knicks to reach their ceiling?
I think he's going to have a good postseason. I'd be shocked if he struggles. He's just a very good player. It's not all on him because Brunson is the leader of this team, and if OG's healthy, I think that sort of gives them the three-man monster, a 3-eyed monster, however you want to phrase it. But and I think his problems on the defensive end should be limited with Mitchell Robinson now healthy. I mean, it's a very interesting team to talk about in the playoffs
Mm.
because when did we really see them whole? One or two games with Jalen Brunson, when Mitchell Robinson was playing and Brunson came back. So it'll be interesting to see Thibs' rotation, but I have complete faith in Karl Anthony Towns. I think he's going to be a force inside and outside. He's 6'3", so I think he's a matchup nightmare for Detroit.
Yeah, and as physical, I would agree with you. As physical as Duran and Stewart and all those guys, there's levels, right? So, I know that they're going to try to frustrate him and they're going to send bodies at him and, try to get him off his game. I don't want to see oh man, that was the foul, Towns. I want to see him, head down, be aggressive, take on the responsibility and the role of being a dominant big in this series and by far the best big player that there is on the floor. So, I look forward to seeing him in his first postseason in New York. I know he's going to energize the crowd and, hopefully he plays off them and doesn't struggle. So, we run into a familiar situation we've seen in the past with another big player here in the postseason. So, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what version of him we get. I do think he'll play well. And obviously they're going to need him if they want to do anything.
No doubt about that. I mean, that's why they went out and made the big trade for him. I mean, he definitely has to play at an all-star level in the playoffs, and that's what they're counting on, and that's what I would expect if I were a Knicks fan.
Definitely. Yeah. And, are there any, you mentioned Mitch, and I'm curious to see how much he plays in fourth quarters of these games. I know his free throw percentage in the past has been something people had pointed to. I think, defensively, obviously, he's such a big part of what they're trying to do and makes it so much tougher for the opponent around the rim. What a lot of people don't realize is not only is he doesn't have to block 7 shots, he changes shots. So, and then keeps everything around on the offensive glass. If he's healthy, he's such a big factor. Is he somebody you point to as the X factor? Is another player that comes to mind is maybe someone outside of the big three? Hart obviously does a lot for this team, but you look into anybody on the bench or, anything else that comes up where, all right, I'm going to need this guy to do so-and-so for this team to shine.
They had a very interesting angle on Sportsnite last night about, Landry Shamet, being healthy, being a threat from the outside. Thibs talking about him a lot, yesterday at practice. So it'll be interesting to see how Thibs works him into the rotation and how much he plays. I think at this point it's tough to call anyone on the Knicks an X factor because they are what they are. They are what they are. Mitchell Robinson can't be the X factor right now. He's going to be a made fester. So I mean, maybe Deuce McBride with some energy, but if Shamet, we all know about the minutes police questioning and criticizing who Thibs plays. If all of a sudden Shamet gets legitimate run and is a threat from the outside, that could be an X factor. The others are all knowns. You can't call Josh Hart an X factor after the year he's had. And, Bridges, they went out and got gave up, the future for him. So I think the only kind of quirk here is will Thibs surprise us by playing more people off the bench?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. There's a couple guys that, I think if certain people are on the floor, things might have gone wrong. If we're seeing Precious Achua, and that's no knock on him in meaningful minutes, it's probably someone, in the front court in serious foul trouble. But you hit the nail on the head in terms of McBride for me. I can't see a world where the Knicks are doing what they need to do, and that might not just be the first round going forward. These McBride 4-point games are going to be tough to survive, in my opinion. I just think off the bench, you need that shot making. He did it in the playoffs at times last season, but I think consistently having him between 10, 12, perhaps even 15 points a game could be such a huge lift for them and take some pressure off those top dogs.
No, I mean, you see glimpses. He's had big games, so you always wonder, if it can be consistent. He's had to deal with some injuries this year. But, the other thing is, the breaks in the playoffs, a little bit different than the regular season. The NBA likes to space them out, at least early on in the playoffs. So to see if that keeps the Knicks' legs fresh and, Thibs not going to the benches maybe as frequently as some fans would want. But I think you're absolutely right. McBride needs to be a factor, definitely.
Yeah, and, another thing with this Detroit team, because you hear all the narratives, you hear what the fans are saying, and then obviously what Knick reporters are telling you, and then you're tuning in and seeing it. And when we were on last time, obviously you mentioned the minutes police and campaigns jump shot, what it looks like. So I know you're very tuned into what people are talking about, and this leads me to my next point. the physicality. And all I hear this season is how this Knicks team isn't, quote unquote, as tough as they were last year. Whether they lose Hartenstein and DiVincenzo and Randall, and now they've become this, perimeter-oriented team that's afraid to be physical. You're going to get a challenge here in the first round, with a team that wants to bang you around and wants to get physical. So they can answer those questions pretty quickly. And are we backing down from the physicality? Are we going at somebody? And I think that, you'll have that question answered pretty quickly.
No doubt about that. I think they have to meet the Pistons halfway. I don't think they have to change who they are. I mean, Mikal Bridges, isn't Dante DiVincenzo. OG isn't Randall. I mean, Randall had a little edge to him, which, the Knicks fan loved and hated sometimes.
Right.
That's not OG's game, but OG certainly can put the clamps down or at least make life a lot more difficult for Cade Cunningham than it has been against the Knicks for him this year. So, and look, Karl-Anthony Towns is not your classic big man hanging out on the block like Patrick Ewing. Obviously I'm well aware Patrick Ewing went outside as well, but not to the extent Karl-Anthony Towns does. So they are a little bit, of a less physical team. That's not their makeup right now. But I think with Josh Hart leading the way and playoff intensity, they'll meet that physicality.
Yeah, no question. I think, to me, like the meet the halfway point is certainly, rings true. I think in the playoffs last year, everybody wanted someone to just punch Embiid. And I think, are we going to win basketball games? Or what's our goal here? I think, I understand you got to be physically tough and not back down. I understand that part of it. But there can be a healthy balance. I don't think anybody looks at, like you said, an Anunoby as being a soft basketball player. But collectively, I think they're going to have to be, relatively physical. And my thing I look at all the time is the rebounding numbers. I mean, are we getting beat on the offensive glass? Are we losing the loose ball battle? And are we cleaning up our defensive glass? If those things are happening, then, I'm not sure. I don't know if you want to see WWE or UFC. I don't know what, you want to be the case there. But that's where I think I'll draw the line. Hey, are we getting manhandled in the paint? And if we are, then that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the Knicks are going to be – I don't think it's going to be WWE, to your point. I don't think it's going to be that physical. That's not who the Knicks are. But I think the other thing is, with the ball, they got to do a better job of protecting the ball. I remember one game, I don't know if it was the last Celtic game or Piston game, where Thibs really pointed out the turnovers. So, and I think that all comes with being more focused. I think the Knicks probably looked around and realized they were locked into the 3 seed. They weren't whole. Not that that's an excuse, but they weren't whole. So I think they kind of took the last 2 weeks of the season, last 10 days, as an afterthought, not condoning it, but I think it's tough to base the Knicks on those last 10 games, but it's the last we saw. So I get it why fans are nervous a little bit, and people are thinking that this isn't the team we thought the Knicks would be. But I think in this first round series, they'll get back to the early season and being impressive and winning 5 or 6.
Well, I think in those specifically, I don't really care too much about, the last couple of weeks as people are pointing to, as they were kind of in shutdown mode, it would appear. But the games against Cleveland and Boston where they had nothing to play for. Cleveland had the 1 seed locked up. They sat Mitchell. Boston had their fate sealed. It was a little, to me, strange that they were unable to close out those games. And it seemed like the Knicks had, their guys on the floor. But does that make or break this run? I'm not sure. I know that they're not thinking about that anymore. And the one key word that I use in all my post-game lives and everything when I talk about this team is health. And over the last couple seasons, we haven't either gone into the playoffs healthy or been able to stay healthy. So that obviously I think is a key thing to look at as well.
Obviously, Randall a couple of years ago was a shell of himself, and then last year, one by one, the bodies fell. So, but that's the same thing for everyone. The playoffs become a war of attrition at some point. You hope obviously everyone's healthy right now. Brunson's back, so there's no excuses for this club right now. Mitchell Robinson's played a lot down the stretch here. Thibs said no restrictions. So, health right now, obviously that could change in one game, but health right now is not a factor, which is a big advantage for the Knicks.
No question. And something that I want to ask you about as well, that I think the team has struggled with, is not only guarding the 3, but how they're guarding the pick and roll. And what I think Detroit will look to do, it's no secret, what I think a lot of teams have looked to do is, can we get somebody on Brunson on the perimeter? And more specifically, I think Cade Cunningham. I read something on Twitter today, a detailed article about what the Pistons will look to do, who they'll look to hunt, and I don't think it's a secret here that the Knicks, their rotations have been a step slow, and guys like Malik Beasley and Hardaway and Tobias Harris and some of the other shooters that Detroit has can, break a game open. So how the Knicks guard the three perimeter and switch, I think will be really big. And what are your thoughts on, how the Knicks are going to be able to defend that and what they've struggled with defensively this season?
Season because a Tom Thibodeau team isn't supposed to struggle defensively, and points they have. I think you got to use the old axiom that with time to prepare, a Thibs team will be ready. They know what's coming. They've had a week to prepare for the Pistons. They played them 4 times. They know how to pick it up a notch in the playoffs. So I just think the switches and the jumps have to be that much faster, that much quicker. Pay more attention to the scouting report, and I think they'll be fine. I mean, don't get me wrong. There'll probably be a game in Detroit where they're steps slow and they get blowtorched. That's playoff basketball. We've all seen it. But I think I'm confident that they'll win the first 2 games in New York, steal one in Detroit, and then be ready to go the rest of the way.
That's the plan, right? That's it. The plan is not to surrender home court advantage, and like I said before, the Bucks are coming in here with a guy that's won a championship and Giannis Antetokounmpo. That to me is, even though Lillard might be banged up, I think, I don't know, not to say I don't have respect for Detroit, but I'm hoping that Cunningham is not incredible. Because I think in order for Detroit to win this series, he's going to have to be. And we've seen it in the regular season. We know the playoffs are a different animal, but we are all hoping that this isn't the Cade Cunningham coming out party, because that could be a recipe for disaster if you're a Knicks fan.
Coming out party against the healthy OG Anunoby, the Knicks are in big time trouble. Look, he's going to play well. Don't get me wrong. I don't think he's going to embarrass himself, but I think he's going to have to work a lot harder, and it's not going to be as easy for him against the Knicks as it was in the regular season.
Definitely. And I mentioned Beasley and some of these other guys. He had monster 3-point games against them. They were giving up 120, 125, game 40, game 50. Now everything slows down. Now the lights are on you. Now, like I said, the hope is, that the game gets a little bit slower and the Knicks are ready to dig in. And, it's so hard not to, I'm going to say look past, but it's so hard not to say, all right, what is a successful season? What could your hopes be against Boston? But I just want to see something in this round that gives me faith that they could ignite something here. And I alluded to it before with the flipping of the switch. I mean, listen, you can't fool someone for 82 games, but I'm hoping that they pull, remember the Memphis game in Denver, and there was a stretch where wow, this is what we're supposed to see. If we could revert to that and somehow extend it, I mean, that's the glass half full optimistic approach that I'm just hoping they play their best basketball when it matters most.
I mean, I think it's kind of been an unfulfilling season because after last year and the big trades, you thought they could play for a championship. And now here you are, kind of you being the generic you, kind of resigned that they're going to lose in the second round. And I think that's the consensus feeling. And how could it not be? So, I don't feel the enthusiasm and joy going into this playoff series. So you would hope that maybe they can provide that for at least one round and give you hope against the Celtics. So that's, kind of the hope. I don't want waste year is not fair. After last year in the trades, you thought that this would be a special season, and it hasn't been. I mean, it obviously hasn't been a disappointing season, but 51 wins. I understand it's the most wins in maybe 12 years, I think. And that's not to be discounted, but it's not. It doesn't feel like you want it to feel. No doubt about that.
Yeah, and if you would sign up for 51 before the year started with the 3 seed, and we talked about the.
Not the 3 seed. I would have liked to have been better than Cleveland or Boston. I thought going in they were better than Cleveland. Give Cleveland credit. Cleveland's better than I thought they would be. So I was wrong about their bigs. Their bigs are really athletic, and they caused the Knicks a lot of problems. But after those trades, you looked at the Knicks. I said that's a 2 seed. Let's go play the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals. And should have said.
Well, yeah, Cleveland had the year that we were hoping to have. We wanted to have that season. So I understand your point. I mean, also, not to mention the honeymoon is over because the Knicks now went from, all right, they were, I want to use the word underdog in any way, shape, or form, but when you go to the playoffs and win a series, then you go to the playoffs again and win a series, you can no longer say, and I've tried to use this narrative almost as a coping mechanism when I feel bad about a loss. Oh, look where we were. Well, we're not there anymore. That's not the reality of this team anymore. We're not the 17-win team going for a lottery pick. We've been here now. Like I said to my friend the other day, the days of winning and not to say I won't be excited if they win at the buzzer tomorrow, we'll be jumping around, but or Saturday, but the days of beating up the Pistons in the first round and throwing a crazy party might be numbered. I mean, listen, people are going to go nuts outside MSG regardless. It's New York City, you know that. But the expectations have certainly changed, which is now why the feel has changed versus what you saw a couple of seasons ago.
I don't think beating the Pistons is a big bomb kind of series. They might go crazy, but it's not to your point. We've kind of been there now, but also to your point, I was at the playground the other day and someone was wearing a Knicks shirt. I don't remember the exact year, but it had all the names on the back, and it was like Gibson and Bullock, and I'm like, wow, they were not good, but they are good now. Right. They went out and made big trades, and they were coming off 2 second-round playoff appearances, and you had your excuses the last 2 years. Randall got hurt. Last year, they were losing bodies left and right. The excuses are out the window now. Unfortunately, so the first round series to me needs to be a formality.
Yeah.
If that's a sweat fest, that's not a good sign. And I hate to disrespect the Pistons like that, but the first round series against Detroit with this team should be rocking chair, and let's give everyone hope going into the Celtics.
Yeah, and we've seen top seeds battle before with lower seeds. We've even seen 7 or 8s give, 1 and 2s a run. The point I think here that's important is because where we're at as a team, like if the Knicks were playing great basketball, they had beaten the Celtics and Cavs a couple times, and this series happened to go 6 or 7, but they still won it. I still think there's something needs to be almost, not to say they'll do it in the first round. They won't crush the narrative, but they almost need to do it, I think, for themselves. I think playing really well and, God forbid, winning in 4, perhaps 5, and dominating the series, that would, I think, do something for their psyche and maybe how they feel about themselves and giving guys a lift. And, all right, now we're here. Now we're ready. And I don't think you're necessarily do that against the caliber of opponent of Detroit, but I do think you're right. Needing to play well bodes well for them going forward, especially against the opponent they'll play next.
That's all we want to get to. I mean, unfortunately, I think, to your point, if they had shown up, I mean, obviously, I know the last Celtic game was a great game that they let get away by not fouling Tatum. Right. But, for the most part, most of those games were no contests. Yeah. The Thunder game, so we all watched them. We don't. So that's why there's just no sort of conviction going into the playoffs about this team. If they beat the Pistons in 5 and then lose in 5, you kind of go into the summer saying, okay, right? I mean, so that's the Pistons series, again, to be repetitive, should be a formality. It's not going to be, they accomplished something. That's just sort of avoiding misery. The Pistons series,
no question. I think also something I've talked about with Boston is it took them, and not to say that, that there's excuses here with the Knicks and they made this trade, so it's going to take some time. But, the growing pains to becoming a contender are sometimes longer than what people believe. And the problem here is that guys even though they're in their prime, Boston had the luxury of getting these guys at 20, 21. Remember the joke about Tatum being 19 for 5 years? They had their growing pains, but they were getting the conference finals. They played LeBron in 2018 in the conference finals and then had the luxury. Okay, then they got to the finals in 2020, finally winning last year. This Knicks team is thrown together. Guys are getting near 30 soon. So they don't necessarily have the ability to say, all right, we'll go through these growing pains. And when everybody's 32 or 33, is that when they break through? So it's a different scenario than when you build a team through the draft as via the Knicks have built it through the trade.
Growing pains. You need to grow. Losing in the second round 3 years in a row is not growing, right? I mean, that's why this year you wanted to at least get to the Eastern Conference Finals and then see where you stood. Even maybe even you kind of thought, oh well, if we were healthy, we could hang with the Celtics. We haven't seen it. So there's no reason for anyone to believe that he'll be any different in the playoffs, other than healthy. Okay, so that's just where we are. It's just they didn't compete except for that last game with the elite teams in the NBA.
Definitely. And you got to promise me one thing. And by the way, I know a lot of the people that tune into this program recognize the work that you do at Sports Night and obviously what you've been able to accomplish. If if the Knicks get by Detroit and that Boston series does get interesting, we're gonna have to have you come on here and talk about that for a little bit, because that would be a lot of fun, and that's the hope right now. I understand. I got one thing from doing this for the last couple of years, Eamon, is I got to take my Knicks goggles off, and I've tried to be a straight shooter, and it's hard because we want the team to be good so bad, and we've struggled through a lot of years, and now we're experiencing playoff basketball. We've had a little appetizer, and we're just so desperate. But I appreciate you very much, and I love watching you and your insight and how you carry yourself. Look up to you in that way, and it really does mean a lot when you join me here.
I'm happy to come on, and hopefully, let's make a deal. If there's a game 5, game 6 of the Celtics series, I'd love to come on and talk about it. I hope it happens for the New York sports fan and for me on Sports Night, because it gives us more than just baseball to talk about. So I hope the Knicks give us a long run here.
Absolutely, man. Well, all the best to you, and hopefully this is a relatively stress-free series. Doesn't usually add up that way for the New York Knicks, but we're hopeful. And Eamon McAnaney, appreciate you, man, and all the best to you.
Have me on. Talk to you soon.
Of course. Thank you.